guys? Everybody having a good time? Oh, we are in the home stretch, and we have saved some of the absolute best for last. This, for me, to be speaking here with Brian Murphy, a dear friend, a mentor, a former employer of mine, is a kind of a special thing. I was basically the first half of my life focused mostly on one thing, which was like playing baseball, and I did it professionally, and then I tried real hard, real fast to get smart and into the world of finance and Wall Street and investments. And this guy over here kind of gave me a chance and took a chance on me, and I'll forever be grateful for that. And so, anyway, I would also add, when we think about Sandlot Partners history and how we got started, there was a first deal on the Breeze Airways side, and Brian was just completely instrumental in making that happen. And so I don't think it's stretching it too far to say Sandlot Partners wouldn't exist without Brian Murphy, which has to do with us all being here today. So I want to just everybody give Brian a hand if you don't mind. So I want to get through, if it's all right, just so you get to know him a little bit, some of his background, and then we'll dive right in. The actual topic is balancing entrepreneurship and family, and he's got some really cool insights and stories to share with us. But just a little bit on Brian for a second. He grew up in East Brunswick, New Jersey. He attended finance undergrad at BYU, did his master's at Columbia, New York, was an investment banker at Chemical Bank in New York, co-founder and 28 years at a firm called Portfolio Advisors, which is where I worked for a little less than 5 years. Shortly on them, they're U.S. middle market private asset management specialist, founded in 1994 with 41 billion, not million, billion assets under management and 140 employees worldwide. Their headquarters in Darien, Connecticut, just outside New York. They also have offices in Dallas, London, Zurich, Hong Kong, and Singapore. He and his wife, Louise, is here today with some of their family. So fun to have you guys. They are, very generous and very involved in community and giving back. Just naming a couple of things. National Advisory Council at BYU, National Advisory Board at UVU, Chairman of the UVU Endowment Investment Committee. He and Louise have 4 children. How many grandkids do you guys have now?
12 with one in May coming.
All right, exciting. That's fun. And fun fact about Brian, so this will be tied to his story of entrepreneurship, but he hates to fly, and he has flown on over 2,000 airplanes building this firm, traveling the globe. What was the stat? How many miles per year for how many years roughly did you fly in?
It was about 250,000 to 300,000 a year, but I was on a circuit, and I was flying around the world every month.
Yeah, so, he wasn't in the office a ton because he was out hustling to raise capital into the, north of $10 billion and just also masterful at the investment committee. So a true talent, led by example, and was always, willing to help and be there for me and others at the firm. So let's go into a little bit on entrepreneurship for a minute, Brian, if that's all right. You went from Chemical Bank to Portfolio Advisors. I'm guessing it didn't have 41 billion in assets under management when you got there. What was it like then? And there's a lot of people out in this audience. They're founders. Some have already built companies, but there's a lot of people aspiring to be entrepreneurs. Give us a little context, a little bit on the story of how Portfolio Advisors came to be and the success you've had. By the way, his firm is closing very shortly to merge with a firm called FS Investments, a spectacular firm, a lot of great synergies. It's going to be a fantastic outcome for both firms, but certainly for Brian and for his team there. So congratulations on that. Thank you. But there's so much that led to that. Maybe give us a little bit of color on the firm itself, Portfolio Advisors, and how you got it built.
Sure. So I was raised in a pretty entrepreneurial family. My dad had several patents. He was a scientist. And anytime I ever wanted to get a job, he would say, no, you don't want to do that. Why don't you just start a business and figure out how to make money doing that? And that way you can earn adult pay instead of kids pay. And so I was doing creative things all the time growing up to make money. And so I kind of had that in my DNA. When I turned 30 years old, the bank had just been through a major restructuring, and it was pretty obvious to me that I didn't have a mentor left. He had gone to work for a new startup called Blackstone, and he wasn't able to take all of the team with him. And so kind of I was in the best place of the bank, and we were making the most money, and then all of a sudden it looked like I was imminently unemployed. And so that gave me some courage. Maybe it was blind ambition or ignorance, but when I was 30, I started my first investment management firm. And I had an edge. I think you always need an edge to kind of reduce the risks and to increase your odds of success. And that edge was that I had a client that I worked really, really hard for, and they seemed to like me. And so I went with a really big ask, and I said, if I start my own investment firm, would you be my first client? And I was waiting for the, yeah, we'd love to, but. And they said, well, how old are you? I said, I'm 30. And they said, okay. And so I started a firm when I was 30, and they became my lead client. And that was really a nice pat on the back. I ran it for 5 years, but what I quickly realized was I was in such a hurry to start the firm to get out of Chemical Bank because of the kind of demise of my group that I really didn't pick the right partners. They were good, capable people, but they didn't have the same long-term vision that I did. They didn't want to work as hard as I did. And so when I turned 35, I started Portfolio Advisors with a couple like-minded partners, and we shut down the other company. And that was a really, really smart decision because Portfolio Advisors has scaled far bigger than I ever dreamed of when we started it.
So what would you advise? It kind of sounds like you figured something out between the first and then the second one, the importance of picking the right partners. It sounds like both like-minded. I assume, were they complementary in their skills? And any insights you could provide to folks that are entrepreneurial and seeking to start to build their own company there?
We had complementary skills. What was really interesting was it was easy to see where we could do things well and do the same things well. Some of our hidden strengths didn't come until we started to find we weren't growing or we were failing. And I remember the day I came home and I told Louise, my wife, I said, we're not growing because everyone is so busy, no one is out marketing because we're taking care of our existing clients. And so it's easy to justify your lack of marketing. And if we really want this to be successful, I need to volunteer to be in charge of and be accountable for the growth and the marketing. And she's like, do you really want to do that? And the answer was, no, I really don't want to do that. You see, when I was young, I was pretty shy. Well, when I go teach at the university, I always tell people that when I was a senior in college, there were two things I completely knew about myself. One was I didn't want to ever be a public speaker. I didn't want to give presentations. I just would enjoy sitting behind the desk and doing computer stuff.
How about sitting in front of a crowd of a few hundred people?
I have butterflies. My mouth is going dry. This is not natural for me. I do really well in small groups. Big groups still make me nervous. My second weakness was I could not get on an airplane without throwing up. I had horrible motion sickness. And yet, I didn't want to do a job where I couldn't go and be dynamic and be an investment banker or a venture capitalist or an investment manager. Those required a lot of travel and a lot of presentations. I did go to the BYU Career Counseling, and I took their survey, and their recommendation was that I be a mortician.
Wow.
And I thought, I get that, the shy part, and I get the non-travel part, but I have zero interest in being a mortician. So what I tell the college students is, if you want it bad enough, you can change your very nature. You can learn to go from being an introvert to an extrovert. You can learn to fly. You can even get over motion sickness. How bad do you want it? And that's what I had to figure out, and that's what I did.
That's interesting. I want to tie back to a story when you were younger where you were probably still more this introvert, and there was somebody else that was introvert that the story we'll get to at that time who's since, become a lot more of a public figure. But you were in track back in New Jersey, and he was, a studly track star, and he went to a regional event, and basically rather than me tell the whole story, I'd love it if you could talk about this story, and then we'll tie it into this conference on the back end of it.
Sure.
He told me the story yesterday, and it was amazing.
It was kind of funny because I was a decent athlete in high school, and so I moved, and the first Saturday I was at this new home, they had a stake track meet. The young people would never have heard of that, but they used to have basketball tournaments and softball tournaments and volleyball tournaments and all that stuff for church, and this happened to be a track meet for the stake. And I thought, I'm going to win a couple gold medals. No way can I not do this. And we get in the first event, and it's a 100-yard dash, and I'm out in the lead, and then this person flybys me like I'm standing still. And he beat me by 20 yards. I thought, geez, that guy's fast. And then we did the shot put, and he outthrew me. And then we did the high jump, and he outjumped me. And then the long jump, and he outjumped me. I thought, I'm 0 for 8. I haven't won a single thing. This guy's won every stinking contest. And the last contest was the throw for distance of a softball. And I had a pretty good arm, and I thought, I'm going to throw this thing so hard, I'm going to throw my arm out of the socket. But I'm not letting this guy beat me again. I'm pretty competitive. And I beat him. And my little brother runs up, and he goes, you just beat Steve Young. You just beat Steve Young. And it wasn't until I was listening to his speech about the law of love that I realized he let me win. He thought, this guy hasn't won anything, and I've won everything. I'll just let him. And he came in second.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and I've read some of his stuff and talked to him. What impresses me and what I think motivates me is that, if we feel like we have these weaknesses or we're kind of hitting the ceiling on certain things, personally, the introverted, extroverted, or I'm not good at this or I'm not good at the other, with the force of will and the decision to just work harder and break through, and a mindset to actually believe that you were able to get there. Is that about fair and what happened?
I mean,
I don't
believe you can overcome everything. I had a son who said, I'm going to be an NBA basketball player. I said, you might not be more than 6 feet tall. Yeah. And he said, my dad doesn't believe in me. I said, no, I play the odds. So, there's some things I know people can't do, but there are so many things that we can overcome because we're human, we're learning, we can change. I mean, the whole thing is to kind of increase our level of perfection all the time. So I think we can do a lot more than we ever think.
I like it. Well, let's talk for a minute about your firm and then how that, private market investing, right? And some of this conference is wealth, wisdom, wellness. Part of why Brian's up here is because he's really an expert in private markets. Also because he and his wife, Louise, are some of the more generous people I've ever met, and which we'll get to in a little bit. But just for a minute, when people are thinking about investing, whether it's them, whether it's their families, whether it's at a bigger endowment or institution level, why are the private markets, important? How do they access them generally? And what is it about them that are attractive, and why you should have exposure there?
So I remember during the global financial crisis, we had a dozen or so phone calls of people who had watched their net worth drop significantly, institutions, and they said, send me my money back.
By the way, when you say institutions, just for some people that may not know.
A big public pension plan. So we managed $2-3 billion for the Utah retirement system, a big insurance company, a sovereign wealth fund. So this is kind of institutional capital versus individual capital. But they panicked too. And we said, well, we don't have any liquidity provisions in our funds. You commit to our fund and you get your money back over 10 to 15 years. And they said, okay, we'll go call the other guys. And so, we never had a redemption because they're not allowed to get a redemption. But that saved them so much money because human nature is we buy high when everything seems so rosy and we sell low when we panic. And the fact that they were forced to fund the capital calls that I sent them and we bought at the bottom of the market added hundreds of basis points to their returns, and it gave them a very, very solid portfolio return over time. We've invested almost $80 billion now as we've grown our firm. And our return, if a client gave us $10 million a year for all 28 years, the return's 18% a year. But that doesn't happen if you buy high and sell low. That only happens if you have the discipline to stay in, and the fund structure forces some of that discipline. Yeah. So I love the private markets because they're not emotional. You're buying value, you're holding long term, you're buying into the story and the capability of management, and you're kind of getting your exit when all of the biggest owners want their exit.
I love it. Maybe even at a layer deeper on the private markets, you think about how much information is out there on a public company versus private companies, some information kind of inefficiencies. The growth of the average public company is, I think, around 3.5%, like the S&P 500, versus the private markets much north of that. And then alignment, the average CEO owns, less than a percent of a public company versus private companies and founder-led companies, sometimes 100% or certainly, much higher than 1%. How does that factor into, how, people with the right exposure and with the right partners can get, a little bit better returns?
Yeah, so most of our clients measure our success based on how we perform versus their alternative. Usually the alternative they compare us to is a public market. So if I put my money in the S&P 500 or in the Russell or in the NASDAQ, how much more can you make me than that?
Yep.
And what we usually teach them is that in a diversified portfolio, you're taking almost the exact same risks as in a public portfolio, except you're willing to take some illiquidity. So how much extra do you need to earn for taking that illiquidity? And the answer is usually 2% a year, 3% a year. And we've been able to beat the public markets by about 800 basis points,
Yep.
or about 8% a year. So if it's done right, and if you stick with it and you go through multiple market cycles, it has the ability to add a tremendous amount to your returns. When I started my business, the average pension fund invested 3% of their fund in privates. We have pension funds that now invest 50% of their fund
Wow.
in privates because they realized the ability to go illiquid is truly an asset. It's not a problem, it's an asset, because who needs all their money tomorrow?
Yep.
An endowment doesn't. They're supposed to be perpetual. A pension fund better not. That means nobody gets their pension after a year. So people have that asset, and people are only really learning in the last 10, 20 years that can be valuable and that they can increase their returns.
Yeah. You're starting to get a sense for, the mastery and the experience that Brian's picked up about, particularly on the private market side. I want to shift gears now for a minute and talk a little bit about you and Louise, and some of the things that you guys have done, what matters to you personally, and you've been one of the more generous people that I've been around in my life. Why is that? Where did that come from? Why have you guys chosen to give? And by the way, I've seen him do it. There's certainly financial giving, but there's also like energy and time with actual people that nobody is ever going to meet and know about, that I've seen countless, where he and Luis has had impact. But where does that come from, and why does that matter to you even as you continue to have financial success?
I think it starts with your parents and kind of their heritage. Louise and I both just had solid middle-class parents. My dad moved to a really rich part of Connecticut, and he was a farmer when he was growing up. And he used to taunt people in his ward that they'd spend $20,000 and $30,000 and $40,000 on these really fancy Caribbean vacations, and that maybe they should donate that to the mission fund, to the church, or give it to charity and help all these other people. It's hard to grow up in a household like that and not feel like charity is part of your DNA. Louise is a really important part of that. Casey shared some personal examples. When you feel inspired, you need a fully supportive spouse. Someone that also feels the Spirit and says, do it. And that's been an important foundation for us. There are many times where I come to her with ideas, and she said, if that's how you feel, go do it. And those have been some of the most rewarding and inspirational moments in our life. That is when I feel that I have abundance. And it's been great, and we've tried to teach our own kids that. And I would encourage everyone to think that way. It's really when life changes from the rat race to when does it become a stewardship? And when do you count your own blessings and realize you have more than most people, and you have an obligation to give back.
How young did you start? Did you wait until you had already had financial success?
when you come out of school and you make $50,000 a year, you think you really have made it.
Yeah.
You live in New York City and you realize you still are almost able to qualify for welfare.
Yeah.
So I've always felt you need to give regardless of your resources. Sometimes you can give time, sometimes you can give your talents, but you have other times where you can give cash. I used to tell my friends, I said, you always tell me that you're praying for someone that you love because they have a problem. How much does it cost to solve that problem? One guy goes, well, I've had this home teaching family. I've been praying for them for 4 months. I said, well, what does their problem cost? And he goes, like $1,000. I said, here's $1,000. Go solve their problem. And he goes, can you do that? I said, well, of course you can do that. I said, hey, so I didn't think you're allowed to give people money in the church.
Yeah.
I said, you can. And so he said, you know what, keep your money. Let me go do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just have weird assumptions or myths. But I think we can be the instrument in the hands of God many times. And I think Heavenly Father blesses us if we take on that attitude.
I love it. Let's give him a cheer for that. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Some of this is because these stories, I feel like, truly need to be heard. They help all of us. But you're merging, with this other firm. It's a great outcome for your firm and for you and your family, and it's been decades in the making. You shared something with me recently on what you guys chose to do because, of course, people that are equity holders, that may or may not be the same impact to people that don't have equity, but maybe just, if you don't mind, if you're willing and comfortable, I'd love to hear you, just if you could share a little more about that.
So
and why you guys chose to do it. Yeah.
I was invited a decade ago to go and lecture at a university on the East Coast. And they gave me a Leader Servant Award. And in the Q&A session afterwards, someone said, you've had a really interesting career. What was one of the highlights? And I said, one of my highlights was when my secretary retired. I had the chance to give her a check for $2.4 million to buy out her stock. She was a former lawyer who had burned out. We had hired her. It was part of her rehab, and she was a wonderful secretary. And I said, the fact that she can have a really comfortable retirement makes me feel for a moment like Bill Gates. Because I remember when I was in college reading a story about Bill when he went public, and his secretary became a millionaire. And I thought, wouldn't that be the coolest thing ever? And we've been very generous in spreading ownership in our company over the years. I always thought it was odd when someone sold their company that one guy made all the money, because it takes everybody to make the money and to make the company successful. And so I could count that the deal was going to create about 85 millionaire families because we had spread the equity so broadly. And that felt really good. I was so excited for those families. But my wife and I had the opportunity at our holiday Christmas party.
Wasn't it Waveney Park anymore?
No, we outgrew Waveney Park. We get the mic very last during the dessert because as the founder and managing partner of the firm, I always get to kind of close down our global week. I fly all of the employees in from around the world, and we all have a really fun week together and do strategizing and all of those things. And sorry, this was one of the biggest moments of our life. At the merger, I'm stepping down as the managing member of the firm. And so it was kind of a little bit of the swan song. And so I asked my wife if she would read the presentation that I had put together. And she said, "Why do you want me to read it?" I said, well, as you can tell, because I'm not going to make it through it. It's too close. She said, what do you think? I can make it through it. I said, because you've had 4 kids, and everyone says that makes you tough, so you can do it. And so she graciously stood with me in front of our firm and announced, we're grateful for the year. We're grateful for this merger. We're grateful for so many of you that were wise enough to buy equity in the company and for this wonderful outcome for you. But half of you in this room don't own equity. But we love you and we appreciate you. And so earlier this year, we set up a scholarship and we're sending all of your children to college. And thank you. So, we figure we'll send 300 kids to college. And we just thought, charity begins at home. And these are the people who are my company family. They've done so much. They've helped us to accomplish all of our financial dreams. And this is an opportunity for us to give back. And my wife was 100% supportive. So one of the keys of success in life is find a spouse or be the spouse that can be your biggest cheerleader, that can ask you good questions. I know my wife rolled her eyes many times. I'm really competitive and I do stupid stuff. I told her one night I had just had an emergency appendectomy. And I said, hey, in 7 hours a car's coming to take me to the airport because I got to fly to Wisconsin and pitch this deal. She said, you're on Percocet. You have to go home and sleep. You can't get on an airplane and fly. I said, no, I asked the doctor, and he said I wouldn't explode, that nothing physically would go wrong, but I wouldn't want to. I said, I want to, so I'm going to go. And so I went, and I won. And I slept all the way there. I slept all the way home, and I slept for 2 days after I got home, but I won. And so sometimes you do stupid stuff because you're competitive. And she let me do it. I think she probably figured I'd get to the airport and turn around and come home, but I didn't. So.
Well, I love these stories and insights, and for letting people kind of see your heart and Luis's heart. Balancing family and entrepreneurship is our theme. The conference is Mastery of Wealth, Wisdom, and Wellness. You have an exciting new chapter. You're still working very much with the firm, but you have, delegated out some of those responsibilities. You've picked up a lot of things. You just shared an insight into like wellness and health, and I guess one of my questions is, what insights or what advice do you have for folks in the crowd that are just super career oriented right now, but they think it's probably the right move, but they're also concerned that they might jeopardize or sacrifice some of the other things like family and their health and other things in their life? What advice do you have?
I would first disclaim that I'm a really crummy person to answer that question because I have not had a balanced life. It's been a dream life for an average guy, but it's not been balanced. Louise has carried a lot of the water, raising the kids, helping to do some of my church callings. I read a book that a friend wrote called The Zigzag Principle, and he talked about work-life balance, and it was only 10 years ago that I read it, and I called him up and I said, I wish I had read this 25, 30 years ago. I said, it made so much sense to me because I've always assumed in my life that if I'm going to be a good dad and a good disciple and a good boss and a good husband and all these other things, that I had to spend equal time in all of the different areas. And life just doesn't work that way, or at least my life has never worked that way. And his book basically said that he counts the number of times that he crosses the line, moving from sector to sector, and if he crosses frequently, he's in balance. He said it's never an equal percentage in any one bucket. He said, I'll do a startup and I'll be in one bucket almost purely for 6 months. He said, but I will then take my family on a 1-month vacation, and I will do all of these other things to bring balance back to my life. And he said, it's the frequency that you cross through those lines that gives you the balance. And I just thought, you know what? That's so true. And
Love
that's what we've made work. I've always worried that I was a bad dad, and my kids have turned out great. They've got a wonderful mom that's raised them well, and they don't seem to hold it against me. So I'm trying to make up now. I'm trying to travel less and be there more, be a better grandpa than I was a dad.
I love it. Last thing, the cause that we're here supporting is Primary Promise. It supports Primary Children's Hospital and a whole lot of things that are helping kids in Utah with healthcare. You and Luis have generously, pledged to do $1 million to Primary Promise, and maybe just a little bit on why, and then just any other comments you want to make on Primary Promise.
Well, in my life, I have always been excited about my investment portfolio. Tremendous confidence in what we own. My biggest problem has always been liquidity, because you have to be able to make your capital calls. And so that's what's always caused me concern. And when you raise $1 billion and you have to put up 1 or 2 or 3% of the capital alongside your clients, you have these big cash obligations. We've raised $42 billion, and so it became some very big cash obligations. And so I've always tried to measure my philanthropy based on my liquidity, not my net worth, because if you make a pledge, they kind of want you to fund it. And so when they came and they spoke to Louise and I, they said, we really would like a donation. And almost every donation we've ever made has been anonymous. I've always prided myself in being the anonymous rich guy. And so, like, my bishop would come up to my kids and say, what does your dad do? And my daughter says, I think he works at the mall. And that was because my office was near the mall, and the kids would come over and they would have lunch with me at the food court. And he said, I pressed her a little bit and said, what does he do at the mall? She said, I think he sells shoes. And so I said, do you sell shoes at the mall? I said, I'm a very good salesman. So I never corrected him. To this day, he thinks I'm a shoe salesman. So we never put our name on anything, but they specifically asked in this case, would you do this? Because there are friends of yours that we're going to talk to that I think will be inspired and motivated to also contribute. We just thought it was a wonderful cause. Todd did a great job talking about why it was a great cause. We believe that. But I told him, I said, my problem is I have a liquidity event coming, but I only get 9% in cash. So I'm going to own a lot of private stock in another company. Can I pay this over time? And they said, sure, how long do you need? I said, how about 4 years? And they said, okay, all right, we can do that. And I said, well, I'm happy to make a donation, but I don't want to borrow money to make the donation. We have to wait till the cash comes in. And so they said, we have lots of people that are doing that. So they were kind enough to let us figure out how it worked for us so that we could pledge as much as we could and make it still work within our cash flow profile.
No, that's helpful. Give me a hand, guys. We're out of time. I think I'd just like to end by just thanking you, personally for believing in me and for helping Sandlot, which in turn in some ways got us here today for this conference, and just for the example and the leader that you've been to me, for the friends that your family have been to my family, and just for your generosity as well, and for your time today. So thanks again.
Thank you.